Imagine this. It's Valentine's Day. The city is glowing with love couples holding hands, fancy dinners, expensive gifts. Everywhere you look, people are celebrating. But in the middle of all this happiness, there's a forgotten corner, a place no one wants to see. A man and a woman sit together on the cold pavement. No roses, no chocolates, no candlelit dinners, just each other. People walk past them without a second glance. Some whisper. Some shake their heads, but no one stops. No one cares. Until one man does. And what happens next will stay with you forever. Before we begin, like this video, it helps share this powerful story with more people. Subscribe for more real, emotional, and inspiring stories. Comment below, what would you do in this situation? Let's talk about it. And share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Now, let's begin. It was a cold February evening in Atlanta. The streets were alive with celebration couples walking hand in hand, exchanging gifts, and enjoying candlelit dinners. Valentine's Day had transformed the city into a glowing display of love. But in the shadows of this grand celebration, near an empty bus stop sat James and Lisa. They didn't have flowers, chocolates, or a fancy dinner reservation. All they had was each other, and that had been enough for years. James wrapped his arm around Lisa as she shivered. Their clothes were thin, and their blankets provided little protection against the cold. They had learned to ignore the stares, the whispers, the people crossing the street to avoid them. They weren't just homeless, they were invisible. Shaq notices them. Shaquille O'Neal had just finished an event and was heading to a restaurant. As his car stopped at a red light, he looked out the window and saw them. Something about them felt different. It wasn't just their situation. He had seen homelessness before. It was the way James held Lisa. The way she leaned into him, the way they clung to each other as if they were the only thing left in the world. Shaq felt a pull in his heart. "Turn the car around," he said to his driver. He stepped out, his 7'1" frame towering over the couple. They tensed, used to being chased away. "You guys okay?" Shaq asked, his deep voice gentle. James hesitated before answering. "We're surviving." Shaq crouched down to their level. "How long have you been out here?" Lisa sighed. "Too long." Shaq sat down on the cold pavement beside them, his massive frame making the moment feel surreal. James and Lisa had met many people who threw them looks of pity, disgust, or indifference. But never someone like Shaq, someone who truly wanted to listen. James hesitated before speaking. His voice was rough, tired. "We weren't always like this. Just a few years ago, we had a normal life. We had jobs, an apartment not big, but it was home. We had dreams. We were happy." Lisa smiled sadly. "I used to work at an office, administrative stuff, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills." James worked in construction. He was good at it, too. James let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Yeah, I loved building things. There was something about taking raw materials and turning them into something strong, something lasting." His voice turned hollow. "Funny, isn't it? I used to build homes for people, and now I don't even have one." Shaq felt the weight of those words. James exhaled, staring into the distance. Then everything changed. The company I worked for started cutting costs. First, they reduced hours. Then, layoffs. One day, I showed up to work, and they told me to pack my tools. Just like that, gone. No warning, no backup plan. Lisa rubbed his arm. "I tried to hold us together. We had some savings, but it wasn't much. My salary alone wasn't enough to cover rent, food, bills. Every month, we fell further behind." Her voice cracked as she continued. "Then a few months later, my office shut down. It happened so fast. One day, I was sitting at my desk, working like normal. The next, my boss was handing me a final paycheck and telling me they were closing the company. James clenched his fists. We begged the landlord for more time, but they didn't care. Bills don't care. We had nowhere to go. I called my brother, thinking maybe we could stay with him for a bit. Lisa swallowed hard. He said no. Shaq frowned. Your own brother? James nodded bitterly. Said he had his own problems. That was the last time I heard from him. Lisa wiped a tear. We tried everything. Shelters were full. Jobs were impossible to find without a permanent address. It was like, once we lost everything, the world decided we didn't exist anymore. James shook his head. You ever notice how people stop looking at you when you're homeless? We became invisible. Some people even crossed the street when they saw us, like being near us would make them catch whatever we were going through. Lisa took a shaky breath. We slept in our car for a while, but eventually we couldn't even afford that. One morning, we woke up, and it was gone towed away because we couldn't make the payments. James looked down at his hands. That was the worst day of my life. Not losing the job, not losing the apartment, losing the car. That was the last thing keeping us safe. And when it was gone, Lisa nodded. We had nothing left, just each other. Silence hung in the air. The cold wind cut through the streets, but the pain in their voices was colder. Shaq's chest tightened. He had always known that life could be hard. But hearing their story, feeling their struggle, it wasn't just hard. It was cruel. Finally, Lisa looked up at Shaq, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But no matter how bad it got, we stayed together. We've been hungry. We've been freezing. We've been ignored and treated like trash. But we've never given up on each other. She squeezed James's hand. Love is the only thing we have left. Shaq felt a lump in his throat. He had seen a lot in his life: championships, fame, fortune. But this was real strength. And at that moment, he made a decision. I'm not just going to help you, Shaq said, his voice steady. I'm going to change your life. James and Lisa stared at him, unsure if they should believe him. They had heard promises before, but Shaq wasn't like anyone they had ever met. And this time, everything was about to change. That night, Shaq got them a warm hotel room. For the first time in years, they slept in a real bed. The next morning, fresh clothes and hot breakfast awaited them. But Shaq didn't stop there. He made some calls. One of his friends owned a construction company. Another needed an office assistant. He lined up job interviews for both of them. James was nervous. I don't even remember what it's like to have a real job. You got this, Shaq assured him. All you need is a chance. A few days later, James walked out of his interview, shaking with emotion. He looked at Shaq, eyes filled with tears. I got it, he whispered. Lisa hugged him tight, both of them sobbing. Shaq grinned. Told you. A week later, Lisa got hired too. They started saving. They found a small apartment. For the first time in years, they weren't just surviving, they were living. Months later, Shaq received a letter. Inside was a photo of James and Lisa in their new home. Shaq, we don't know how to thank you. You saw us when no one else did. You didn't just give us money, you gave us dignity, a future, hope. We will never forget you. Shaq read the letter twice. Then he smiled. That Valentine's Day, the city had been filled with roses and chocolates. But the greatest love story wasn't found in expensive gifts. It was found on a cold street corner between two people who had nothing except each other. And thanks to Shaq, now they had a future too. Because sometimes the greatest act of love isn't in giving things, it's in giving hope. Some people measure love by gifts, fancy dinners, or grand gestures. But real love? Real love is holding on when everything else falls apart. James and Lisa had nothing except each other. And because one man stopped to listen, they got a second chance at life. This story isn't just about them. It's about all the people we walk past every day, the ones we choose not to see. A small act of kindness can change a life. And maybe, just maybe, the world needs more people willing to stop and care. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video. It helps share this message with more people. Subscribe for more powerful and inspiring stories. Comment below what's one small act of kindness you've seen or done that made a difference. Let's spread positivity. And share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Because kindness is free, and it could change someone's life forever.